Today, I speak with award-winning stage and screen actor Hoon Lee. Hoon is best known for his portrayal of Job on the critically acclaimed TV show Banshee. He also voiced Master Splinter on Nickelodeon's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and plays Wang Chao on HBOMax's Warrior. We discuss everything from science to comics. I learned so much from this conversation. I really enjoyed hearing about Hoon's upbringing in Wayland, Massachusetts, and his background in graphic design and tech. He also shares his deep love and respect for the stunt community. I feel so fortunate to have these fascinating conversations with guests like Hoon. Now, on with the show. Hello, Hoon. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, I just feel like part of the Warrior family now because you are yet another guest from the wonderful hit show Warrior, and everybody has been so wonderful. And I know from other interviews and just everyone talking about you as well that you're going to be the same.
Oh, that's very kind. They're all on payroll and they're all liars. That's good.
I love it.
Liars.
Well, one of my first comments actually when watching Warrior is I was watching and I was like, oh my goodness, he has the most amazing voice. And of course, I was talking about your character, Chao. So I've seen, of course, most shows that you've been in now, Banshee and Warrior and even Mulan, and you do kind of showcase your voice and your range. But of course, then I looked into it and you've done voiceover work and you have experience on Broadway and even singing. So
Yeah.
I love Broadway. So you had me at Broadway and musicals.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I got started actually. And I'm just glad the community's starting to open back up. I have a lot of friends in that community and they've had a really tough go of it. And not just professionally, but emotionally, there's a reason why people do what they do. And I know it's been really tough for them, really challenging. So I'm glad things are starting to move in that direction.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know for me as a martial artist and as a performer, it is just like my means of expression and getting out a way of who I am, but also just the work ethic part of it and your identity. So for you, I guess it's a bit of the same. You've been able to still do a lot of film projects despite the pandemic. What is that kind of like? What has this last year been like for you? Congratulations, by the way, on C coming out. And I know that all of this has been kind of crazy, but you've still managed to kind of keep going, keep your head above the water.
Well, I mean, a lot of that has to do with Jonathan Tropper, who was my showrunner for both Banshee and Warrior, and brought me on to C when he took over as the showrunner for C. And I think everybody's sort of in the same boat where we're all we're navigating something completely new, both personally and professionally. And I know that you were speaking to this. The concept of sort of the means for personal expression, but there's also this need for sort of community expression, right, and social expression, and being denied those things on a regular basis is also throwing up challenges we don't think about a lot, I think. So I've been very lucky to be able to work, of course, and I haven't taken that for granted at all. But it does sort of cast a light on all of the ways that people are wrestling with this time and facing challenges, and that just sort of weighs on you when it's your friends and your colleagues. It does sort of stick with you as well. But I mean, I can't complain about that side of it. It's been personally a challenging year, and I think everybody is suffering in some way because of what's going on, whether it's a direct sort of loss or whether it's something more removed from that, but quite oppressive in its own way. So I don't know. I mean, work is work, but life is life, and
yes.
So
yeah. And of course, I've been listening to a couple of your other podcasts, and something that you said really resonated on one of them when we were talking about the pandemic. And they kind of asked you, like, do you think it's always going to be this way, or auditions always going to be this way? Is the pandemic going to change everything and it's forever going to be changed? And you said something really, just really amazing, which was pretty much that, you can't make those assumptions. You can't make those presumptions because your life completely changed within a week's notice without even knowing it when you got the role in Banshee, which, by the way, of course, you're fabulous in, and totally want to get some notes on some of the outfits that you wore. And If I could get the special flowing effects also that happens when you move.
Well, as I say,
Some
it takes a
tips.
village. I was very heavily assisted in all fronts on that in that role. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No. I love it. I was just curious as to, like, you had mentioned on that podcast that it as bad as things are, we can't assume that it's just going to continue to get worse, because life keeps throwing us different loops, and sometimes for the better. And I think one of the things that we can kind of, misery loves company kind of thing. Like, we're all in this together. Well, most of us anyway, we're all in
Right.
this together. But I loved your outlook on it, that basically, we don't want to look at this as going to be negative forever, and Broadway's forever going to be closed, or, there's not going to be any more of XYZ. I thought that your outlook was really, really positive, and based on your experiences.
Yeah, I think people, um, in a weird way, it's like we find ourselves looking for reasons to, or how would you even frame this? Perhaps we think it's safer to look at things with a cynical eye. Perhaps we
Mhm.
think it somehow reduces the potential for disappointment or
Yeah,
sort of,
prepares us.
and yeah, exactly. But more and more, I just don't see the point of that. I don't think it's particularly valid. I think the course of human history on its whole is incredibly positive, and optimistic. And if things were going to take us down, we had ample opportunity before now to be completely wiped off the planet. Um, and we still have those dangers. We're going to wrestle with those existential crises all the time. So, much like if you were thinking of a personal endeavor, like for example, if you were in training, right, doing what you do, and if you approached every training session assuming that the failures were going to compound and there'd be no forward progress, there'd really be no point, right?
Of course. Yeah.
So you can't approach an individual endeavor that way. So collectively, it doesn't seem to make sense for us to do that either.
Mhm.
There's a difference, though, between a sort of useful skepticism, and a useful sobriety about the challenges being faced, and despair or overt cynicism, or even worse, I think, is a sort of active pessimism that seeks out an enemy, that seeks out
Mhm.
a target. And I see a lot of that. I don't think it helps us. It certainly drains energy, and that can't be useful right now. Um,
Yeah.
but you see a ton of that, and I try not to indulge in that too much. I try not to fall prey to it too much, but you know, it happens, of course. But
Right. Yeah. Well, we're all only human, right? And
exactly.
but to your point, um, we persevere, and we keep keep carrying on. So, and I have to say, I've been scrolling your social media, and I consider myself to
Oh,
be
so
a bit
you're
of
the
an,
one.
yes, it's me. Oh, please. But I consider myself to be a bit of an activist in the community, especially of
Hmm.
late.
Yeah.
Obviously, for Asians and Asian Americans, and Asians in general all over the world, have had
Yep.
kind of a year with this pandemic. And
Yep.
one of the things I'm currently working on, I'm super proud of, that I take every chance to plug every opportunity I get, is working on including Asian American Pacific Islander history in our
Mm.
state. And so
Hmm.
it's something I'm working on with Congress, and it's something I'm really excited about. But also, I'm a huge advocate for public health,
Mm.
and doing the right thing by our neighbors, and getting vaccinated if that's healthy and viable for you, and also masking. And I have to say, I've really enjoyed a lot of your posts where there's been a bit of a back and forth with some of the fans in regards to your posts on science and vaccines. And I love that in your bio, you highlight your son of scientists. And
Yeah.
I'd like to know why that's something that you kind of identify with, and that why that's something that's in that byline, and how it shapes your identity. And then I'd like to talk about those posts as well.
Sure. um, my parents were both molecular biologists. My brother is a molecular biologist, and I grew up in a highly driven academic sort of environment. Um, and so I have a lot of comfort in those areas. Not expertise, not deep knowledge, and I don't want to give anyone that impression, but
Mhm.
that is something that just in the way that if you grew up in a particular area of the country, like you'd probably feel quite at home there, right?
Yeah.
And so it's been a real learning curve for me encountering all of the sort of vaccine skepticism that's out there, because I don't personally identify with that. I don't respond to it. But I also don't think it's invalid in the sense that the fears are valid. Like anybody's apprehension about things, that's absolutely valid. I don't think it's useful to condemn people for having concerns.
Right.
What I think is equally not useful is a sort of blind attachment to an ideology, which I do think um, does happen to both sides of the argument.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a reason why we have leaned on science so heavily as we've developed all of the ways that it's managed to allow us to transcend limitations. It's not perfect and we make missteps with it, but if you were to just chart the overall trajectory, it's absolutely astonishing what it has allowed to do, what our growing understanding through science has allowed us to do. And it is puzzling to me that, or correction, it's not puzzling at all. It's troubling to me that people would fasten on a particular aspect of this particular event and potential solution to the event as a repository for an incredible amount of skepticism that perhaps is spillover from some other area of understanding or experience as well. But it proved baffling to me on that level. But that's from my perspective as someone who feels comfortable in that place. And maybe a lot of people really don't. You know, if you've had a bad experience with doctors, that's going to color your experience with all doctors, you know,
Right.
moving forward until someone really proves you wrong, you know, until someone really sort of counterbalances that experience. So I choose that byline because there was a time at which, during the Trump administration, where there was a rising tide of anti-immigrant sentiment, there was a rising tide of anti-science sentiment, and I thought to myself, I am a child of immigrant scientists.
Yes.
Like this in some way speaks to me or attacks me personally, and I thought it was something I wanted to put out there because I don't take the audience for granted. The people that have chosen to give me their time and attention and money, in the case of, like, you know, Cinemax was a subscription only service for so long, like way past when they should have been. And you know, that's a special thing. And because they like some of the work I've done, or they think well of that, they give me the benefit of the doubt on social media in a way that they might not for someone they don't follow, you know. And so I try to be respectful of that. There have been a couple of run-ins where, you know, people have taken issue, but I've always felt that the only way, like, you're never going to make everyone happy, so you
Right.
just have to be as true as you can to your own conscience and to a sense of authenticity. So I try not to put anything out there that I don't sincerely feel, and that I feel like I would stand behind in a conversation face to face with someone. And that's sort of the acid test, I think, is if you're going to put a comment out there, would you say that to someone's face? And if you wouldn't, and if you're being honest with yourself, if you wouldn't, why not? Why wouldn't you? That's a question worth asking, I think.
100%. Because that was kind of, I was like one of those people that was a little adverse to social media in the beginning. And that was a big thing. I felt like so many people were hiding behind the computer and being able to just say whatever they wanted. And I'm a very assertive and confrontational kind of person. Maybe it's the kung fu side of me, but I like to have a conversation. Like if someone has an issue, I want to talk it out. I want to see you. I want to have, you know, an adult conversation. And I just felt like I didn't get that. Right. And as a, you know, Asian American, as a woman online, you know, you get, and I'm sure you've had the same, but you know, you get all sorts of comments, right? And it can wear on you. But yeah, I felt the same way. Like if you wouldn't have that conversation personally, it makes complete sense. But it's been really fascinating to watch because, you know, you'll put something very basic up about science or about, hey, did you realize breakthrough cases are not driving the US COVID-19 surge? And mind you, now I am in Florida. So not very proudly the epicenter of Delta. So yes, apologies again. I say this every podcast as well. Apologies on behalf of Florida to everyone. But uh, but essentially you had, some of the people lash out a little bit at you, basically try to kind of start this a bit of an argument and like, oh, I love you as an actor, but and then give you all of their, kind of quote unquote facts. And it was kind of fun because normally I see these in the comments, but
Mhm.
you went ahead and screenshotted them and put
Yeah.
them in your post.
Yeah.
And it was really fascinating because, the last one, of course, ended with, I took screenshots also, and I'm sending this to HBO. And I was
Yeah.
like, okay. But I thought that this was kind of incredible that you kind of went ahead and just like posted it out there and was so open, because I think that dialogue is actually, people can actually learn from,
Right.
whether, as amusing and entertaining as it is, you can actually learn from them. So I actually really appreciated the post, by the way.
Well, I don't. I mean, I'm quite sincere that I will do that with things I think will lead to greater conversation, and
Mhm.
that particular person, um, perhaps inadvertently, had opened up a very interesting topic to me. Like, my background is in tech. Before I became an actor, I was doing tech startups, and so the
Mhm.
ideas and questions of privacy, social media, et cetera, these questions have been around in my head for many years before Facebook came by. And I was working with, you know, ideas of startups that never made it, that were
Right.
all community based. And we were, me and the companies I was with at the time, we were thinking very deeply about, how do you do this? How do you build a community that's safe? That was one of our fundamental questions.
Mhm.
So the idea of ownership of conversation is a really important one to me, and
Yeah.
one that I feel qualified to articulate. And so as I mentioned, I knew it was going to come off as sort of like a jab at that person, but the reality is I do have to, I feel like I have to be as authentic as I can and consistent. And so I did find what that person had brought up to be quite compelling to talk about, which was kind of ironic, but uh, at the end of the day, that's all I can do. Whether someone chooses to believe me or not, whether someone thinks I'm full of shit or not, whatever it is, I don't really have control over
Yeah.
that. But I have to be able to like sleep at night. That's really the only qualification. I have to be able to look at my wife and son in the eyes and say I did what I thought was correct.
Right.
And that's ultimately the only gauge I have that makes any difference.
Mhm.
I want to ask you something, actually,
Sure.
if you don't mind. So you talked about the idea of you being, maybe because of your background in martial arts, that you sort of feel like you're an outgoing, assertive person. And you were talking about that within the context of social media conversation.
Mhm.
And that it led you to the thought that people could be hiding in some way.
Mhm.
And I think because you set up the contrast as an Asian woman, right?
Uh-huh.
So one question I have is, do you think the opposite is also true, though? Do you think that people who would normally feel reticent or unseen, do you think they have a voice because of social media?
100%.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's
So
100%. So
that's the
I
double-edged sword,
that's a
isn't it?
double-edged sword. And yeah, that's like one of my posts actually from not too long ago, where I'm literally using the double-edged sword. And I'm like, life is a double-edged sword, because here I am on freaking social media, the thing I'm always like, but it's also because of personal experience, right? So personal experience always plays into how then you proceed through life, right? And so because I had a like negative experience first, and then I've learned to embrace the fact that now I am talking to you, for example, is
Right,
indirectly social media. It's really through
right.
networking, but essentially, that's how we kind of, a way that it's easy for people to connect. A lot of times I'll notice people prefer to, reply in the IG, whereas I'm like, no, please text me or email me. I'm still very like, I'm very much in like that platform.
Mm,
But I can see why it's so beneficial for so many people that have a voice, that maybe feel better writing and feel better, being able to type something out and express, as long as I believe that it's true to oneself. Right. I
right.
feel like I was kind of referring mostly to like the trolls and people
Mm,
who literally just go out there to be kind of hateful, and also, um, definitely hide behind the computer. I'm like, please come and have that conversation with me personally, and I bet you it would go differently, right? And the same goes for anything to do with science or any of these conversations. I feel like the double-edged sword of, yes, I think it does help us see more people than we would ever get to. We have a connectivity. On the other hand, I also feel like people are lonelier than ever because of it.
Mm.
And earlier we were talking off air about seeing our friends or acquaintances having a good time and just trying to go, you know what, we're putting that out there, but who knows what's really going on. Like you're showing that you're having this great time, but really you go home and then you're sad. And I've seen that
Mm.
side of it as well. So the social media thing is super interesting and fascinating. There's a really interesting documentary, I think, on Netflix.
I
It's
think
going
I
to
know what
escape
you
me
mean.
right now. Yeah,
Yeah, I
of
know what you
course, I'm
mean.
not going to be able to pull out the name like I'm super versed in things, but but I think it's I don't remember, but I will link it here and later in the show notes. But yeah, it's really fascinating because I also work with children, right? And so I've
Oh,
worked with
wow.
kids since I was
Great.
12. I've been teaching since I was 12 years old.
Oh,
So
that's right.
I've
Yeah, yeah.
seen generations of kids change because of social media, how they interact, how they are able to communicate with one another. So before I used to be able to have pretty good conversations, and now sometimes it's just very different when they're used to looking at a screen and they're used to acronyms and they're used to so every generation is vastly different, and that's definitively because of social media and and having things in the palm of our hands. As a tech person, as I mean, but I can't live without my iPhone. I mean,
Right.
I don't know what I would do. So
I mean, I think that it's when people are deplatformed, for example, the thing that's interesting to me about it is not that they're deplatformed, because by the letter of the law, there's no issue with that. The problem to me is that it feels like silencing to the general public,
Mhm.
uh, which really highlights sort of our reliance on these tools, right? That someone feels like, oh no, if someone took away my Twitter account, it's like I have no voice,
Yeah,
right? That sort of strength of connection to the tool itself is what's actually interesting about it. And it's untrue, right? It's not actually true,
hmm,
but it is a valid feeling. And the validity of the feeling is actually more important, right?
of
Because it
course,
will
because what you
have,
feel is your reality. Yeah,
right. And it'll
yeah.
prompt you to something else. It'll bring you to some different understanding or to an action or whatever it might be. So I wrestle with it a lot, but again, in the same sort of vein as sort of a general spectrum of trying to look forward. I mean, we didn't have computers not so long ago, right?
Hmm.
So we're constantly in the process of adapting, and that's been part of our overall trajectory too. And it might be a two steps forward, one step back sort of process, but on the whole, we have managed to make things work for us to generally improve things. Even if the highs are higher, the lows are lower, the overall trending seems to be going up. And I expect that to continue, um, unless we break the pattern in some way, So even
Hmm.
social media, it's very young. We don't know what it is. And the fact that there is a positive side to it that is easily acknowledged by anyone who even criticizes it
Hmm.
gives me a lot of hope. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it's very
100%.
easy to see what could be great about it,
Yes,
and it's
yes.
easy to see what the problems are, right? But we've never just tried to, well, we have historically a couple times, but we've very rarely tried to just wholeheartedly reject something we thought might be good just because it has a problem,
Hmm.
right? Or it has several problems, or because those problems are large. So I feel like that same pattern will start to play out with social media too, as we try to figure out, and some of that's on us, some of that's on like learning a new protocol, learning language, learning new social conventions that allow us to discern a troll from a genuine person or a Russian
Hmm.
bot from someone else or
Right.
whatever it is.
And
We will
also,
learn those things too.
yeah, and like anything else, you have a son, you've mentioned, right? And so it's up to you as his parent to guide that
Yeah.
and inform, right? And teach, right? So it's also a matter of like the information we get. And of course, speaking of education, I was born in Boston, actually, but I
All right.
grew up mostly in Florida, but I go to Boston every year because
Mhm.
my father's organization, his Kung Fu school, started there. And so the
Oh,
heart
wow.
of our martial arts system is in Boston. And so we have
That's great.
several branches there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I'm so very rooted in the Boston community. And I
Hmm.
see that you kind of grew up in Massachusetts as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And of course, went on to Harvard, have to say it for our listeners who don't already know. And I'd love to hear a little bit about what growing up in Massachusetts was like for you, because I was born there, but I grew up here in Orlando, and it was it was not very diverse at all. Whereas I remember Boston, we were in Chinatown. My father, had really established kind of a community there. And then just to kind of leave that and restart here was really challenging. But I'd love to hear a little bit about you and what that was like. And not to be stereotypical, but I'm sure your parents, being immigrants, were really thrilled that you went to Harvard.
Yeah, I mean, we lived for a brief time in New Haven, Connecticut, and I
Connecticut.
think they very conscientiously sort of raised us in the shadow of giant Ivy League institutions. It was no secret.
Hint, hint.
They were like, you should go to Yale, and then we moved. You should go to Harvard. But I think the reality is we lived in a suburb of Boston, about 30 minutes out, Wayland, Massachusetts, and it wasn't terribly diverse.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like I don't think I even had a great metric for what diversity meant or looked like. And I honestly didn't give it too much thought, to be honest. It wasn't until I did get to college and was suddenly sort of inundated with all these different types of people and diversity in every possible dimension, right? Financial and status, class, race, savvy, like sort of just general awareness of the world.
Yeah.
If you've spent most of your life buried in textbooks, you may not have the best awareness of other aspects of life. And so I felt like that was really where I started to become more conscious of not just what was out there, but what people cared about. Like I didn't particularly care about diversity, but I suddenly met people who really cared about diversity. And so you start asking questions of them and of yourself as to why this is important, or what its implications are, or what its history might be, or the lack of diversity, what its history might be. But similarly, I was fortunate in the sense that I felt like I was sort of on a path that people, if anything, would envy, right? That they would see a path through the Ivy League as an enviable position. And so I didn't feel like I was missing out on things, right? And it wasn't probably till well into adulthood that I really started to become more cognizant and aware of sort of all the different sorts of colors that play into this idea of diversity, or play into the ideas of racist behaviors, or play into the idea of institutionalized racism, et cetera. And so I feel like that area of concern is actually pretty new to me. It feels, or at least the level of understanding that I'm striving to achieve is a pretty new thing. Can I ask what brought you to Florida from Boston?
Honestly, in a short answer, my parents will tell you the weather.
That's a good reason.
Yeah. They said the heat went out one winter, and my mom was like, well, my mom is born and raised in Jamaica. So she's of Chinese descent, but she's Jamaican. And my father's from Southern China. And she's like, we could die here because it was freezing. And I was actually born in between the blizzards of 78. So if anybody from the New England area knows, like everyone was like, oh, so literally I was born between those two huge snowstorms. Gotcha. And yeah, my mom was just done, I think, with the weather, and my father as well. I mean, there's other reasons, of course, but that's probably a short answer of it.
Right. That's pretty good bookends, Boston and Florida. I mean, Massachusetts and Florida. That's pretty interesting.
Yes. Good. Yes.
That's good.
Yeah, it's different. It's different. And what's interesting about everything you just shared as well is I talk to so many people now, especially since the pandemic, and there's been all these anti-Asian hate crimes, and everyone's asking, well, have you ever had a racist, interaction? Have you ever felt racism? I said, I don't think there is one person of color, one BIPOC community member that you can talk to that would say no. However, as children, a lot of times we didn't realize at the time that we had been subject to, racist comments because we were children and we weren't scarred by it necessarily. So some people for sure have had instances where they were scarred by it. It was very traumatic. I was fortunate that I had instances more where people were just really rude and made fun of me or my name or said things, right? But you don't take it as, oh my goodness, this is a racist like ideology. Like we know so much about it. It's as we're adults, we kind of realize trauma and we realize things we've been to. I mean, I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and that is also something people kind of don't understand how to connect or ask questions about. And it's like, just because it wasn't a violent thing doesn't mean I'm not traumatized. And just because at a child age, I didn't realize what was happening, as an adult, it's actually where we feel more of the effects, right? And I think the same could be said with, kind of what you were sharing, that, you didn't really think about the fact that you weren't in a diverse community, or, perhaps maybe experienced some, racist jokes, or had people that may have been offensive to you or said something about your parents. Where are your parents from, by the way?
Oh, they were both born in Korea.
Korea.
Yeah, but my brother and I were both born here in the States. Yeah, but to speak to what you were just talking about, there is something to remember about when kids grow up. They usually have fairly limited frames of reference, right? So I think it wouldn't make a lot of sense for them to for us to expect young children to have the sort of sociological framework to think about what's happening to them through the lens of like societal racism, for example. But you do know something's wrong. You do know that someone's making fun of you. You do know that they're making fun of you for these reasons. You just can't. You don't necessarily have something out there to connect it to as a larger concept, et cetera. And I remember that one of the ways that it became more clear to me was as an adult and as I started to act, the question that started to come to mind was, if I looked at someone who was getting an audition and they happened to be white, for example, if I kind of ran down the checklist, there wasn't really any other reason why I wouldn't get the same audition. Similar ages, similar physical types, similar levels of experience or exposure, all of these things. And that's when you start to kind of go, okay, there's information here about this. It doesn't mean it's definitive, but it was something that I had never really seen before, because in other areas growing up where you were being stratified by qualification, I was doing fine. Right. So, and if you're doing fine, you don't think about who's not doing fine,
Right.
like that's a sad reality often. Right. I think it takes a certain level of awareness or a certain amount of eye opening before people kind of do that. But that was kind of one of the first times. And I was fully an adult at that point.
Right.
It wasn't something where I was like 16 and going through some sort of like adolescent angst about it,
Yeah.
I was going through adolescent angst about other things. But like,
Do share. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So I think that's and the idea of how to talk about these issues, that's really important. The thing you just brought up about the idea that, we want to make things very binary in our understanding, that either you are destroyed or you're fine. And it's kind of like there's this huge gradient in the middle where really the realities of both of those extremes are held together simultaneously. And we find ourselves in this position all the time where, whether because we want it or because we're somehow incentivized towards it, people seem to want to sit at one end of the spectrum or the other, and then sort of evangelize from there, right? Where you could kind of be like, we can have both. Like both of these things, they're not mutually exclusive things. We don't have to have this sort of understanding. I often wanted to talk about like the stunt community, because
yes, let's.
Stunt community, I've worked with a good number of stunt teams now throughout my career,
especially Banshee and Warrior.
Yeah, and one of the things that they taught me was that the stunt community draws from a very broad cross section of people, and I would say maybe more so than the acting community. And you have people with very diverse interests. You have people that are sort of intelligent in different ways, like they're very physically intelligent, perhaps, but they don't feel comfortable with scripts, maybe, that sort of thing. And I encountered a lot of people who had pretty different views from my own politically. For example, like I have a lot of questions about Second Amendment rights. A lot of these guys have full arsenals,
Yeah.
and but I took the opportunity to really try to talk to them about it because the
Nice.
reality was these are people that I entrusted my life to and was happy to do so. I would have no question about this person who maybe is on the extreme right from where I am,
Yes.
keeping me safe. I would never have a question about that. That person would lie down in traffic for me.
Hmm.
But if you got us in a political debate, we could not be further apart.
Yeah.
And that was really educational to me because I felt like both of these ideas coexisted with ease.
Hmm.
That if I were to come off, if we were maybe between takes, we would never do this because everyone's pretty even keel about it. But like if we could theoretically get into a very heated political conversation, from which there would be no return and no reconciliation.
Yeah.
And in 5 minutes, that person would be the one keeping me from like hanging myself
Hmm.
on a stunt. And I would entirely entrust my life to that person and I would gladly do it. And I felt like the stunt community in general has been one of those ways that I've been able to increase my understanding about people as a whole, um, being able to work with them. And in many ways, that production model persists for me as a useful metaphor for how we might all kind of come out of this situation together. Like we can go towards a common objective. We don't have to agree, but we can still work towards this outcome that keeps everyone safe and produces something great. Um, yeah. So
Wow, that was very eloquently put, sir. And I've never heard the stunt community analogized in such a way, and so that's pretty incredible and insightful. I'd never thought about it that way, and been fortunate that I have been a stunt performer. And you go and you do and you work and you believe in what you're doing, but that trust has to obviously be there amongst
yeah.
everything. And like you said, it really doesn't matter what we think about XYZ, because when we're in that space, it's about trust
Hmm.
and just kind of about like believing that we're all here for the same goal, right? It's just to
Yeah.
get the
And like
shot or
Brett,
whatever it is.
I got to give a shout out to Brett. Brett, like, one of the things that I know he's talked about is sort of how he tries to build a company within a company, really.
Yes.
And A, he's quite good at that. And B, we've talked to him about it, but I don't know that people outside of this sphere maybe would understand that if a collection of people go to a place like Cape Town, where we're all very far away from home, we don't have anyone, we have to be there for a stretch of time, it's too difficult to leave. It's like,
Yeah.
even if you're a straight shot, like let's say you're from the UK, that's still a 12-hour flight. It's
Right.
not cheap,
It's, yeah. And it's not
and
close.
it's not close. And so we as a cast, I feel, or certainly I won't speak for everybody, but I feel this is fairly widespread as an understanding. We had to cling together. Um, and within the production, we ended up finding a couple of homes, like places where we could all congregate and feel safe and feel communal. And one of them was Hair and Makeup, headed up by Amanda Ross McDonald, who's just an angel, and her whole team's phenomenal. But one of the others was the stunt room. So the stunt room, the stunt tent, or stunt hangar in our case, it was just a place where everyone was welcome, where everyone could congregate, where you could spend time, you could learn. And, you know, aside from the sort of social comfort of it, the actual functional utility of it is that when it comes to shots like the Chinatown riot,
Yeah.
where you have every single person involved, really, the amount of goodwill and mutual understanding and trust that has been built allows everybody to push harder because they feel safe. So you can go for it because the person on the other side of that action has you and you have them, right? And that would not have happened, I think, with the same level of accomplishment and intensity had Brett not fostered that environment, and not encouraged that environment. And it would have been very easy for him not to, especially for the actors. It would have been very easy for him to say, with the workload I have, which was immense, I need to focus. I need my guys to be focused. I don't want them dispersing their energies,
Mhm.
and he didn't. He went, if anything, he went the other way,
Yes. When
constantly trying to help us progress, trusting that that would help the overall product. So
100%. When I talked to Brett Chan and I was like, you what? You have daily workouts where everyone's invited. You have what? He was just describing the environment. And I have like an inkling of experience on sets, but I had never experienced anything like that, and it was very, very specific and special to something that hits international and Brett Chan that team fosters. And I'm
I will
really glad
say,
you shared that
I will say though that I did personally experience that on Banshee as
on
well.
Banshee as well.
Yeah, Marcus Young and his team, which
Oh,
included
I actually have worked with Marcus
oh,
Young.
Marcus is great. Marcus and David
Wow.
Humber, Justin Eaton,
Oh, he's
Dan
awesome.
Sawyer,
Yes.
all of these guys. Uh, they Mike Wilson, and it was just, it's this team that I found myself like I ended up trying to really get much more physically fit during Banshee, because these corsets were so tight. And then I was in the stunt room a lot, training and working out, and they always took time. They educated me
Yes.
hugely,
Yeah.
and they gave me a place to be and a place to sort of keep plugged into the production. But that's a much smaller show, right?
Mhm.
And so you take that and then you extrapolate it out to the sort of scale of things we were doing in Warrior. And Brett kind of, had a similar sort of idea, but at a bigger scale for the production, and extended to a much bigger cast that wanted to participate.
Right, right.
Um, and so it felt like a homecoming to me in that way,
Of course.
because it felt like something I had, I always look for this now in a production. And I universally find that the stunt community is so like friendly, accommodating, and if you're willing to work, they're willing to work with you. They're willing to work with you and teach you and help you. And see, it was a similar situation. I spent a lot of time with Keanu Lamb and Larry Lamb, and
Mhm.
Keanu in particular was responsible for a lot of the education of me as a swordsman who had to be good enough to teach other people in the show, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I've never really felt disappointed by that community. The community has
Right.
always really helped me get better at my own job. I'm very, very grateful for that.
Amazing. Yeah. And just to be clear, so I don't piss off any of my stunt friends, I had never had like the morning workout and like how he included the cast and that I've definitively been on some amazing sets, but not like that where he's like, yeah, like even the grip, everybody was joining in on the workouts and stuff. Like I'm just envisioning, I'm like, how big is this hangar, like this
It's a pretty
area?
big space.
Yeah. And he was just like, yeah, everybody joins in. I'm going, what? So, but it's fantastic that you have such a love and respect because not all actors do,
Mhm.
give credit and love to the stunt community. And so that is very, very warming. And even though I've been removed from it for a bit, it's still always really warming when we hear that fondness and just the respect for it, because the work is unbelievably difficult, as is acting. But, like you said, they're putting their life on the line for you, and so there's this trust. But well, we've really been talking some serious stuff. And I love it. I love it. I was expecting a pretty cerebral conversation from you, but I do want to talk about, kind of the fun aspects of the work that you're doing as well, because of course you go
Let's
from
talk about stupid stuff.
yeah. Well, you go from a character on Banshee to
Mhm.
a character like on Warrior and even to Sea, and they're just like worlds in between different, and just kind of having that pivoting and that shifting must be kind of a lot of fun. But I know that all actors have a different way of prepping,
Mhm.
either before the show starts or right before. As a martial artist, I really like to hear about like your, pre stage or even pre-film regimens. Like, is there a thing that you do to kind of get yourself prepared for the role, or even just like right before action type of thing? Is there
Uh,
anything you do before you go onto the set in
well,
the trailer?
the first thing is that I think, okay, so the one thing I want to preface all this with is that like there's a limit to how interesting and b useful I think this sort of thing is, because there's so many variables at play even with the same person. So job to job, you might experience a completely different universe of colleagues and creative team, etc. And so um, there's very few things that I feel like I do all the time. There's some things I want to do all the time if I'm allowed to. So physical training is something I want to do all the time, partially because of the nature of the shows I've been on. There's usually some sort of action or fight.
Yeah.
And one thing, because of the way production works, you could be called upon to do that all day out of the blue. And so I've found that trying to plug into a regimen of training, and particularly stunt training, um, makes me more confident that I'm not going to hurt myself or other people.
Mhm.
And that last part is the most important part. Like, it's a very natural thing to sort of focus on yourself and your own performance. But my worst nightmare is that I would hurt a fellow actor, and so, or a fellow stunt performer, like a stunt performer, right? And so keeping my hand in gives me the reps needed to execute as well as I'm able. And then also it keeps me plugged into the production, even if I have long layoffs between shoot days. And I still feel like I'm participating in a part of it, and I still have sort of the scent of it with me. So I will try to do that if it's available.
Okay.
The second thing is, I always start from text. I always start from script, and I really work hard at that part. I pretty much disintegrate the script in terms of analysis. And it's not because I think every script, if you keep mining, keeps giving you ore. It's that it is a tool that I feel very comfortable with, that allows me to continue to generate ideas. So it's like having like a fidget spinner or something, and you keep playing with it and your mind wanders. It feels a little bit like that, where I'll sit down with a scene and I'll break everything apart, and I'll put it back together, and I'll break it apart again, and I'll put it back together. A lot of the times, even subconsciously, or absentmindedly, I should say, like walking around the house or whatever. And sometimes something surfaces out of that play that unlocks a bigger idea, or in the familiarity with it, you are able to draw a line between a scene that's quite far, like two scenes that are far away from each other, and you might suddenly see an echo that you weren't quite aware of before. And just that connectivity between these sort of entangled lines or whatever, that in and of itself can lead you down a path that might prove interesting, right? And sometimes it's interesting not because of what it tells you about your character, but what it tells you about other characters, right? So if, for example, let's say you're dealing with a character that is seems to be a quite rigid character, maybe, right? They're very stubborn. They don't like to change. They don't like to bend. And two similar situations come up, one in episode 1 and one in episode 5. Somewhat similar cases. The character does action A in episode 1 and does action B in episode 2. The gap between those two might tell you more about the other people in the scene, right, than it does about that character. The instinct is to say, what changed in the character? But it might not be the character that changed. It might be the other characters that changed. It might be the circumstance that changed. And so you go, okay, so what do I now know about this circumstance that forced this person who doesn't change to change? Maybe it's more dangerous than I thought. Maybe it's more heartbreaking than I thought. Maybe, whatever it might be. And so you can start to almost see that picture in the negative space of what your character is doing. And so I find that even if I'm not looking at my stuff, if I'm looking at the script as a whole, you find all this stuff in it. And some of it is just subconscious from the writers, right? Like they don't know they're putting it in. I remember in Banshee, somewhere in the first season, I started tracking how often Job used certain words, like called somebody something like sugar or baby or honey or whatever. And I realized there was this disproportionate amount of times that he called Lucas Hood baby, and he didn't really call anyone else baby. And so I asked Jonathan at that point, I said, I'd like to keep this word for Lucas Hood. I want that to be just for him. And so if you go from that point forward, there might have been a stray one early on, but from that point forward, he doesn't call anyone else baby. But that way, when he sits down with Lucas and he calls him baby, it's this thing that I have that I can hook into to try to recall that sense of history and that sense of specificity in the relationship, right? Now, is anyone going to notice or care? Probably not, but I notice and I care. And so it feeds me, it helps me. The other pragmatic reason why I start with script is it's the document that everyone has to agree upon. It's the common document that everyone has to agree upon. So if you can make your case for something in the script, it can be validated by the whole production if you can find it in there. And if you can win an adjustment in the script, it automatically filters out to the rest of the production. So it warrants a lot of respect, like the writing warrants a lot of respect.
Yeah.
And the process of handling it, I think, warrants actually quite a bit of respect, even if you end up modifying it quite a bit. The document itself, is something that has a lot of power, actually, right? Or can have a lot of power.
Yeah.
And I've found that to be very helpful for me.
Yeah. So if I ever need to do scene study, you're the guy that we should kind of go back and forth because you dissect everything and you can break it down really well.
That's not helpful for some people. That's the thing. That's why I say there's
everyone's process is so different.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very envious of people like yourself, probably, who think very intelligently physically. I don't feel that way. That's something I have to work at. But there are some people I know where they feel like when they get the snapshot of the character in their minds, they start to feel it in their bodies and they start to know how this person moves, and that informs a lot of stuff. And I feel like that's a gift, or a learned skill that I don't have a ton of facility with. It's something I work at because it's important, but I have to work at it. Like I really have to work at it. And text is very natural for me, so I go there first. Because it's the lowest hanging fruit that can get me farthest fastest.
Makes sense.
Right. And you don't have time, right? They're like, hey, we're going to shoot tomorrow.
Well, that's always a good thing, actually, that we have those deadlines, because if you don't have those deadlines, then sometimes you can get caught up in your craft. And, it's like any art, it's never going to be finished. I did a documentary actually on my father's life, and I used a film festival as a deadline because I was like, if I don't put a deadline, this thing will never be done. If I look at it today, I'd be like, oh my goodness, I changed so many things about it. Right. But that's the point. You have to kind of just like draw the line. So deadlines are a good thing. I want to talk a little bit about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Sure.
Because I'm a huge comic book geek, actually, and I've actually had a lot of comic creators on the show. I haven't had Kevin Eastman yet, but maybe one day. But like I have had Stan Sakai, who worked on Ninja Turtles and stuff, and I'd love to hear a little bit about the work on that. But also, if you read comics or you kind of have a love for that, it's kind of fun, I think, for us to. I talked to a lot of course, the actors from Warrior, and they're, oh my gosh, I'm in a Bruce Lee epic, then, and that connectivity is just like kind of a childhood thing, but you're in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, I remember reading the original black and whites.
Yeah.
And, that was an amazing job. Not the least of which because I met incredible people. Andrea Romano, who was our director, she's incredible. I think she has like 1 million Emmys, roughly, like rounding down.
Right.
Rob Paulson, who was the voice of Raphael in the '80s cartoon, he came back as Donatello in the 2012 production, and that I was a part of. And Rob is like a legend in voiceover, and he was such a welcoming person. We've become good friends, and he was a person that I'd never done voiceover like that before, and he really took time to welcome me in, to give me encouragement, and I really tried to observe him in the booth, because the first couple months we did the records together, all of us, to try to help build chemistry.
Right.
And understand each other's rhythms, etc. And I would watch Rob work and listen to him in the headphones, and it was like they didn't have to do anything. Like it was like a finished product was coming out of his mouth. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I was like blown away. So to have someone like that, who was obviously so skilled and so knowledgeable, lend me support was a real lesson for me, and it's something I've always tried to keep in my mind as something that I need to work towards. And Andrea was the same. Andrea was like, and so it wasn't an accident to me that both of these guys were sort of like at the top of their game, and they were the most kind and the most gracious. And I feel like that's the way it should be, that if you're in a place where you really don't have anything to prove, it's like, why wouldn't you be? Like, why wouldn't you try to offer that to people who are coming up? And it was an incredible thing too, because oh my gosh, the Ciro Neely, who was a creator, art director, designed all this stuff. I mean, his mind is unbelievable. His skill set is unbelievable, and I was just so excited. I realized right away from the drawings and the sketches that this is a cartoon I would watch, and I did watch. Like even as
Hmm.
someone who was making it, and a full-grown adult and everything, not exactly the target audience. I thought it was fantastic. Like so, it was this lovely experience of great work environment. Learned a ton doing voice stuff, and then also being a fan of the thing you were creating,
Of
feeling it was
course.
very good, feeling that you were proud of it. That doesn't always happen. Most of the time, I feel too close to the material to actually
Mhm.
judge that.
To enjoy
But
it.
yeah, in some ways, and there's actually because I'm a voice, I'm not acting in it. I'm a smaller part of it in a way, right? Actually, much smaller part of it. It allows a little distance, and
Okay.
so I feel like I could just enjoy it too.
Right,
You
right.
um, where I can't really say that about almost anything else I've done. You just don't feel like you have a valid point of evaluation a lot of the time, or I
Interesting.
don't at least.
Yeah.
Um,
And how old's your son?
he's 12.
Okay, so because some of the other work you've done may not be appropriate, but Teenage Mutant Ninja
Oh no,
Turtles for sure.
yeah, but he's not interested in that. He's just like whatever. Like cool, cool.
Isn't that I always hear this. I hear like, oh, do your kids love your work? And I've talked to so many different creators. They're like, no, they don't read my stuff or they don't watch my stuff.
I'm fine with like he's finding his own stuff. That's the way it should be, and it's like I think
Yes.
that's important. Like there's stuff we enjoy together, and I'm very thankful for that. But like stuff that he should have for himself,
Of
like that,
course, of
that should feel
course.
like his. So I don't mind.
Oh, I had to ask you because I was super excited to hear that you actually read the comics and everything.
Oh
Because
yeah,
being a
yeah.
comic book
I
fan,
do
that's
like comics a
exciting.
lot. I collected for a long time.
Okay.
I don't really put that out as much now because there are people who are really serious about it.
No, but you love it, and that's all
I
that
do love it.
matters.
I still read.
I'm the same way. I always get nervous when I talk to aficionados
Yeah,
because I'm like, look. I'm not like my husband's a little bit more here, and I'm like, I can
right,
just talk about the fun parts. So,
right, right. Well,
what did you enjoy or do enjoy reading?
oh man, I had gone on a big Rick Remender kick for a while. Like
Hmm.
I started reading like all the stuff that he did, and that I remember when Olivia got cast in Deadly Class, I was so excited,
Yes,
so pumped
yes,
for
I
her.
enjoyed Dead in Class as well.
Yeah, and I really there's let me see, gosh, what's been happening recently? There was a bunch of stuff that I started reading. I guess more than a year and a half ago. A bunch of Mark Millar stuff, a bunch of
Hmm.
Alan Moore stuff, some stuff that from Alan Moore I hadn't visited at the time, like from
Okay.
Hell. I hadn't read it when it came out, and I was like, oh, I should read this, and got the big compendium and all that. Um, Dead Dog's Bite. I don't know if you've read that one
I have
recently.
not.
And
Yeah.
I because I don't have the room or anything, I do collect digitally.
Me too.
So
No judgment, no judgment.
yeah, yeah. And so there's often a bit of a lag, like where I'm looking at titles well after they've come out.
Oh, well, I'm a little bit of a Netflix comic person. I'm like, I want
Mhm.
finished product. I cannot wait for
Right,
the next thing to come
right.
out a month later. My husband's like, well, I would reread the issue like 100 times. I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
I'm like, every time a new issue comes out, then I have to start at the beginning and reread through because I can't remember what's happened. So I like
Yeah,
to finish like finished product, finish series, but
yeah.
I get caught up in a few that are ongoing. But yes, I love
Uh,
comics as well. So
Department of Truth, which is very good. That's an ongoing series now. And then when I was reading more sort of superhero type comics,
mhm.
I was very into like the X-Men when it was sort of the Jim Lee era,
Mhm.
and even before that, like the Chris Claremont era.
Okay.
Um, and then I kind of lost the thread of that as the whole
Because
sort of
it's
franchise started to
changed a lot.
fragment.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
but
rebooted a few
yeah,
times. Yeah. But the
I mean,
Jonathan Hickman stuff is quite good.
yes,
This House of
it's
X,
quite
Power of
good.
X.
Yeah, I did like those quite a bit.
Yes.
But because I studied art in school, I often find myself I gravitate towards artists, so I'll follow
Ah,
artists too,
okay.
um, in many ways more than writers. So like Sean Gordon Murphy, love his stuff. So I'll read almost anything he draws or creates. Um, Olivier Coipel, I think that's his name. David Aya. He and Nonchenti did this beautiful series called Seeds,
Okay.
which is great. There's these artists that when they show up, Francis Lionel Yu, I think I don't know what he's been up to recently, but I
And you
think some
just
people,
follow
and I'll look for them. I'll look for their
of
stuff,
course.
and also because they're often quite popular artists or well-respected artists, they end up working with quite excellent writing talent as
Yes,
well.
so it goes hand
But
in
if I
hand. They
don't,
collaborate together, and then
yeah,
it's like all magic. So,
yeah,
there's so
exactly.
much good content out there,
There's
but
so
I
much
love
good
it.
content.
I
Yeah.
love, and I love that, it's part of me loves it and part of me cringes like that. There's been so many, TV and film of, coming from comic books, because I think it's great because it's such a great story, but then sometimes it doesn't translate, and then, it crushes our souls. But
Well, one thing I've started to see more is I feel like I've started to see more properties that are explicitly being designed to be multimedia, right? Like
Mhm. Yeah.
or pan media, and I do feel like I can sense a difference between even if a creator does that, like has that in mind,
Mhm.
there are still creators that are looking at the comic as the primary vehicle, or at least willing to sort of give it primacy for this time when they're creating it. And if it has another life, great, but there are other comics that I've delved in, I won't name names, where I kind of feel like this was designed to be a movie. This was designed to be a
Okay.
television show.
Okay.
It's not really designed to be a comic.
Right. Yeah, because they're
Um,
very different mediums. I'm really good friends with Greg Rucka, and
mm,
he's, does novels, he does comics, he does, and now of course the old guard is the film, and we talk about it all the time. He's actually was during quarantine, we podcasted weekly, so it's
nice.
like insane last year. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he's basically like a comic is for comic medium, a
Mhm.
script is for script medium, and they're completely different. And like you said, like if you're writing a comic with that in mind, then it changes the feel of the comic, or it kind of changes the storytelling. Not that it can't be done, but they're just vastly different vehicles and different
I do find
mediums.
that like the thing that kind of tips it for me a lot of the times is the amount of writing, right? Because if you take a comic that I think is designed for comics and you were to try to treat it like a storyboard,
Mhm.
it would be incredibly wordy. A lot of comics that you kind of just blow through on the
Yeah, because it's
page
just sequential art, and you
as you're
go from there
reading.
to there to there, and it's
Like it wouldn't take you that long to read a page in a novel, right? But
Mhm.
if you were to hear that page on screen, it would take a long time. It would
Right.
feel like it took a long time. So they can split the difference in the comic medium in such a way that in certain sequences you might have quite a lot of dialogue, but it doesn't take that real time that it would on screen. And
Yeah.
so I feel like that's one of those areas where uh, I think it's the thing that comes to mind most clearly, like sort of how people will manipulate framing and stuff like that in a comic, and how that feels very specific, or as that whole Scott McCloud school of like this, like what lives in the gutter between frames. But I feel like one of the key telltale things is you can get away with a lot more text in a comic design for comics
Mhm.
than you ever could in a script,
Right.
or in a TV show or in a movie, unless you're in a very specific kind of film. So I do feel like the people that really understand that they let that happen, they exploit that, or they take advantage of it. Yeah. Who's the other creator I was reading for a while? Oh my gosh, he wrote Brian Vaughan.
Brian K. Vaughan.
Brian Vaughan, the K Vaughan.
Oh,
Yeah, his
yes.
stuff is great.
But of course. Are you
Yeah.
reading? Did you read Saga? Are you like
Oh
the
yeah.
rest of us waiting?
I get it. I
Just
mean,
waiting.
I mean that is such an impressive.
Oh, so impressive. And Why the
It,
Last
it,
Man is now on FX,
yeah,
right? I think
yeah, yeah,
starting
yeah.
on FX. Super excited about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, his stuff is incredible. Ex
Yes.
Machina. Yeah.
Yes.
Incredible stuff.
Yes. Yeah. All of his stuff is quite good. So, I love
And
it. I love it.
quite heady.
Oh,
And
yeah.
again, so you're kind of like, yeah, the translation for this is not one to one. It's not the easiest thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that's kind of why I think it makes sense as a comic.
100%.
Um,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I could talk comics with you all day and all of the other things
lots
we've
to
been
talk
talking
about.
about all day, but I want to be mindful of your time. So hopefully you'll come back and talk to me again, because there
Sure.
was a slew of other things I wanted to ask you and we just
Oh,
ran
I'm
out of
sorry.
time. No, don't be
I
sorry. No, this is the show. This is why people come back and talk again, because this is what happens. We typically
Gotcha.
go on and on, but I never run out of things to talk about with wonderful guests like yourself. So,
I
Hoon, thank
appreciate
you so
that.
much for joining me
Thank
today.
you.
This is just so much fun, and yet another lovely Warrior fan. We didn't even really get to talk too much about the episodes and all
No,
of
no.
that. So we'll have to talk about it,
We're not even
in the
shooting
near
it for like a
future.
year, so
Yeah,
we'll
so we
have
got
to.
time to talk about it again and bring it back up. So
Right.
thank you so much for joining
Thank
me.
you. Take care.